December 18, 1941, Alexandria Harbor, Egypt, 23:42 hours. The night is unnervingly still. The kind of stillness that makes every sound feel louder. The slap of water against steel hulls, the faint clatter of boots on a distant pier, the muted hum of generators hidden somewhere behind the maze of British warships resting in the dark Egyptian harbor. Searchlights cast lazy white arcs across the black water, but not nearly enough to reveal what lurks beneath. And beneath it, 20 feet below the surface, two Italian frogmen cling to a torpedo shaped like a metallic sea monster. A Maiale. A pig. Its electric motor hums softly, barely audible, as Tenente di Vascello Luigi Durand de la Penne tightens his legs around the saddle frame. His hands, numb, trembling from hours in the freezing Mediterranean, keep firm pressure on the controls. Ahead of him, his partner, Sergeant Emilio Bianchi, leans forward, watching the luminous gauge with narrowed, salt-stung eyes. Their oxygen rebreathers hiss quietly, releasing no telltale bubbles. Their suits cling tight, soaked through. Every movement feels heavy, slow, deliberate. Above them looms their target, HMS Valiant, a British Queen Elizabeth-class battleship, its hull a massive black wall rising into the night. Hours earlier, Regia Marina officers back in Taranto had whispered that the British ships in Alexandria were decrepit. Decrepit Tinclads kept afloat with patches and luck. Men like de la Penne had heard the jeers, the quiet laughter, the dismissive remarks. And he had said nothing. Because tonight, he was going to prove them wrong, or die underwater trying. The Maiale's nose touches the shadowed underbelly of the Valiant. De la Penne raises two fingers, an underwater signal. Bianchi nods and activates the magnetic clamps. The mine, containing over 600 pounds of explosive gelignite, locks into place against the battleship's belly with a heavy, metallic clunk. Both men freeze at the sound. Above them, footsteps echo on the battleship's deck. British sailors laugh, unaware of the death settling beneath their feet. A boogler somewhere on a distant ship finishes, sounding the final notes of the night watch. The harbor returns to silence. De la Penne looks at his partner through the murky darkness. Their eyes meet, tired, frozen, but resolute. This is what Decima MAS trained them for. This is what their entire service had sharpened them toward. Sliding unseen through enemy defenses, crippling warships with nothing but grit, lungs of iron, and these awkward, temperamental torpedoes the world mocked as gummon-ridden pigs. The preset timer ticks into life, and that's when de la Penne feels it. The Maiale's motor sputtering. They both jolt, grabbing hold as the machine shudders. A sudden sneeze of sparks erupts from the rear housing. The motor gives one final cough and dies completely. A dead Maiale means one thing: no escape. The men will have to surface, captured, interrogated, maybe shot. De la Penne takes one last look at the silhouette of the Valiant's hull above him. So close he could touch it. He reaches for Bianchi's shoulder, squeezes it once, and pushes upward. They break the surface quietly, emerging like ghosts beside the Valiant's anchor chain. Almost immediately, a British spotlight snaps down on them. "Why-oh, Agpio!" Rifles clatter, boots thunder along the deck. Within seconds, the frogmen are hauled aboard by bewildered, furious British sailors. Water drips from their faces as they're shoved onto the steel deck, surrounded by officers unsure whether these men are saboteurs, spies, or madmen. De la Penne doesn't speak. He simply meets the eyes of the Valiant's captain, Admiral Sir Charles Morgan, with a calmness the British find unnerving, because only he knows that the mine is ticking down beneath their feet. Minutes pass. British officers demand answers. De la Penne refuses. Finally, when the last moment approaches, when only minutes remain before the detonation that will rip open the hull, he steps forward, and in a voice cracked from cold and exhaustion, he says quietly, "Your ship is about to explode. I suggest you evacuate the crew." The officers stare at him, stunned, as the meaning sinks in like a stone dropped into deep water. Somewhere below them, a timer continues counting toward midnight. The deck of HMS Valiant erupts into frantic motion. Admiral Morgan's face drains of color as the Italian diver's warning sinks in. Officers bark orders. Sailors sprint to stations, scrambling to determine whether this is a bluff or an imminent catastrophe. Floodlights blaze across the water. Lifeboats swing out on their davits. Below deck, compartments echo with shouted commands as men rush to secure watertight doors. But de la Penne stands silent near the railing, hands bound, lips blue from the cold. His partner, Bianchi, sits slumped beside him, head lowered, shivering violently as British Marines guard them with rifles at the ready. Seconds stretch into agonizing minutes. Men wait, hold their breath, listen for something, anything. And then, 06 hours, the sea lifts. The explosion erupts like a muffled thunderclap beneath the Valiant's hull. A deep, monstrous boom rolls through the ship, followed by a violent upward heave. The deck bucks underfoot. Sailors are thrown to their knees. Storage lockers burst open. Steel groans as the hull gasps inward. The lights flicker. A geyser of dark water surges up through a ventilation grate, spraying across the deck like a fountain of ink. De la Penne doesn't flinch. He simply closes his eyes, because this is below the surface. 600 pounds of gelignite tear through the Valiant's belly plating. The blast shreds fuel lines, cracks bulkheads, and floods lower compartments in seconds. The bow sinks first, dragging the massive battleship deeper into the harbor mud. Though she doesn't capsize, she settles heavily, crippled, blind, powerless. A flagship reduced to a grounded hulk in the span of one breath. On the upper deck, men scramble to assess damages. Thick smoke wafts from the forward compartments. Sirens howl. Engineers clamber down ladders into rising seawater, shouting over the roar of flooding pipes. Admiral Morgan grips the railing, knuckles whitening. He turns to look at de la Penne, the silent prisoner who had warned them, yet still destroyed their ship. "You knew," Morgan mutters, half in disbelief, half in quiet respect. De la Penne simply nods, not as a taunt, not as an enemy, but as a man who has fulfilled his mission. Across the harbor, another explosion rips through the night. The Italian riders of the second Maiale have reached their target. HMS Queen Elizabeth, the pride of the Mediterranean fleet. Her hull erupts in a deep underwater burst that knocks sailors off their feet and sends a plume of seawater splashing onto the dock. The Queen Elizabeth groans as steel plates buckle. Within minutes, she too settles onto the harbor bottom, crippled beyond immediate repair. 2 British battleships, symbols of naval dominance, now lie wounded and helpless in shallow water. The Italian frogmen have done the unthinkable, with primitive torpedoes mocked as pigs, with rebreathers that freeze their lungs, with no hope of escape, and that they have struck a blow that will reshape the entire Mediterranean campaign. But aboard the Valiant, the danger isn't over. Flood alarms continue to blare as engineers fight to keep the ship afloat. Morgan orders all magazines sealed, fearing another blast might ignite the ammunition stores. Damage control crews race through knee-deep water, hauling pumps and sealing ruptures as best they can. Meanwhile, the prisoners, soaking, exhausted, are escorted below deck to a makeshift holding compartment. The British still don't know this night isn't a lone attack. They don't yet realize the Italian 10th Light Flotilla, Decima MAS, has launched one of the most daring sabotage missions of the entire war, or that Alexandria's mighty harbor defenses, nets, patrols, searchlights, mines, have been silently bypassed by 6 men who navigated underwater for hours like ghosts slipping through the cracks of the empire. Outside, Flames reflect on the waves. Sirens howl across the port. And the Italian frogmen, locked in their cell, finally allow themselves a single trembling breath of relief. Because their mission is only half finished, British officers are about to discover just how many warships have mines strapped beneath their keels, and dawn is still far away. The compartment the British shoved de la Penne and Bianchi into is barely more than a steel closet, dimly lit, damp, and vibrating with the wounded heartbeat of a ship struggling to remain afloat. Water sloshes somewhere below them in the darkness. The metallic scent of ruptured fuel lines drifts through the vents. The explosion has rattled every bolt in the Valiant's frame. But the Italian frogman sits calmly against the bulkhead, wrists bound, chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. Bianchi leans beside him, fighting the shivers racking his body. Hours in near, freezing water have driven his temperature dangerously low. From beyond the door, the deck trembles under the thunder of boots, shouted orders, and the hiss of pumps, desperately trying to hold back the sea. The British think the danger has passed. They do not realize the harbor is a minefield. A minefield placed by men the sailors are now guarding. Above them chaos reigns. Damage control teams slog through smoke-filled corridors, guided only by dim emergency lanterns. Water rises through the forward pump room. Engineers scrape sludge from intake valves, cursing the sudden shutdown of electrical systems. Everywhere, confusion, fear, disbelief. How had the Italians infiltrated? How many more were in the water? Were there divers still lurking beneath other ships? The harbor defense commander storms across the pier demanding answers. No one has any. The Valiant's captain has only one certainty. If 2 saboteurs made it under his ship undetected, more could be out there, invisible, patient, death lurking in the current. He orders immediate checks of every major vessel de harbor. It is already too late. 40 hours. On the far side of Alexandria Harbor, another British ship shudders violently. This time a tanker used to refuel the fleet. A muffled blast rips through its storage compartments, sending a column of fire belching skyward, its glow flashing crimson across the night sky. The roar carries across the water like a rolling storm. De la Penne lifts his head at the sound. He knows that blast. It's the third team, Marseglia and Shergat, completing their run beneath the Sagona tanker and HMS Jervis. 2 ships crippled. 3 if you count the Valiant. 4 including Queen Elizabeth. The British sailors sprinting down the passageways have no idea that half their fleet is now sitting in the mud. Harbor is secure. Inside the cell, the temperature drops as seawater leaks into the lower decks. The door suddenly swings open, slamming against the bulkhead. A squad of British Marines enters, rifles raised. One steps forward, jaw clenched. You too. Up. De la Penne stands slowly. He expects execution. Instead, he's marched to a ladderway, shoved upward until he emerges onto the chilly open deck. The harbor is lit by orange flames dancing across the water. Smoke twists into the night sky like serpents. The British officers gather around him, demanding answers. How many teams? How did you get past the harbor nets? Are there more charges planted? But de la Penne no longer holds the advantage of time. The final charges have already done their work. The explosions echoing through the bay are the only statements he intends to make tonight. He meets Admiral Morgan's stare, calm as ever. If you inspect the hulls, he says quietly, you will find your answer. A motor launch roars past the Valiant, spotlight slicing over the water. British divers, hurriedly roused from sleep, sit at the bow with their suits half fastened, preparing for a frantic descent into the black Mediterranean. But even they know the truth. The Italians have already struck. They are only searching for the damage, not preventing it. Admiral Morgan rubs a hand through his hair, eyes fixed on the smoke rising from the anchored fleet. "What you've done," he mutters, "is madness." De la Penne looks toward the water, toward the place where he and Bianchi had ridden their Maiale through layers of defenses believed impenetrable. "Mo," he replies softly, "it is war." The first diver surfaces moments later, gasping, eyes wide. His report hits Morgan like a hammer. "Sir, the Queen Elizabeth and the Valiant, both of them, they've settled on the bottom." A stunned silence falls across the deck. The Royal Navy's proud Mediterranean guardians, warships that had weathered storms, duels, and entire fleets, now sit helpless in shallow water, crippled by two men who rowed a leaking torpedo into the jaws of a fortified harbor. And dawn is still hours away. The announcement spreads across the Valiant's deck like a cold wind. Men pause mid-stride. Officers lower their binoculars. Sailors stare out across the harbor, unable to reconcile what they're hearing with what their eyes show. Two enormous battleships still sitting upright, their silhouettes unchanged but their fates completely altered. Settled on the bottom. Alive, yet defeated. The Queen Elizabeth and the Valiant, pride of the Mediterranean fleet, had not sunk in dramatic columns of water and flame. They had simply died quietly, like giants exhaling their last breath and slumping into the mud beneath them. The shock is overwhelming, and the cause of it all. Two shivering Italian frogmen stand surrounded by armed guards, hands bound. The contracause dancing across a gadget on 10 hours. British divers continue their grim survey runs. Each reemergence brings worse news. Massive hull breach beneath the engine room. Flooding is uncontrollable on the Valiant's port side. A Queen Elizabeth's keel has settled. She's resting on the bottom. With each report, Admiral Morgan's posture stiffens. His voice grows quieter, tighter. He finally turns away from the railing, unable to watch the disaster unfold further. His officers wait for orders. He gives none. Because the truth is dawning on everyone. The Royal Navy's Mediterranean supremacy, once unquestioned, has been shattered in a single night by an enemy they had mocked, by men and weapons they had dismissed, doggone they had underestimated. Below deck, the air thickens with heat, diesel fumes and sweat as engineers fight a losing battle against rising water. Pumps groan, hoses rattle, and water slaps angrily against metal floors. The Valiant lists slightly, groaning from strain. A petty officer shouts over the roar of machinery. "She's not going under, lads! She's stuck in the mud. We're keeping her alive?" But the words ring hollow. Keeping her alive doesn't mean saving her. It means preventing the ship from drowning in slow motion. And above, De la Penne watches the frantic spectacle, the divers, the flames, the small craft racing across the harbor, while standing eerily calm in the eye of the storm he created. A British lieutenant approaches, fury barely contained. "You could have killed every man aboard this ship." De la Penne meets his glare. "I warned you." The lieutenant's mouth tightens. He wants to argue, to lash out, but there is no argument left to make. The Italian officer in front of him had risked his life, delivered his warning, and carried out his mission with professionalism the British cannot help but respect, even as they hate him for it. Behind them, Bianchi stumbles as a wave slaps the side of the ship. A British sailor catches him by the arm, steadying him. For a moment, the two enemies stare at each other, neither speaking, before the sailor gives a quiet nod and turns away. War has a way of creating moments like this, small fractures in hatred where humanity shows through. 200 hours. The flames are finally dying down across the harbor, but the smoke hangs low, drifting between the crippled ships like a funeral shroud. British medical teams move along the piers, tending to injured sailors. Divers lay out their gear, exhausted, their hands raw from hours in the cold water. A senior naval officer steps aboard the Valiant, his expression grim. He doesn't need to speak. The look in his eyes says everything. He knows the scale of the disaster, and he knows that the entire Mediterranean theater will feel the shockwave of this night for months. 2 battleships out of action, a tanker crippled, another destroyer damaged, all done by 6 men riding 3-man torpedoes. It is a humiliation without precedent. Admiral Morgan finally approaches the prisoners. For a long moment, he simply studies de la Penne, searching for arrogance, defiance, anything he can anchor his anger to. But he finds none, only exhaustion. Determination, a quiet pride. You're lucky, Morgan says quietly. You warned us. Otherwise, I'd have hanged you where you stood. De la Penne's answer is steady. I did my duty, as would any of your men. Morgan exhales slowly. There is nothing more to say. He gestures for the guards. Take them below. As the Italians are led across the deck, the first hints of dawn begin to touch the eastern horizon. Pale light creeps across the harbor, revealing twisted steel, drifting smoke, and the strange, pitiful sight of 2 mighty battleships sitting motionless, their keels sunk into the mud, like wounded beasts unable to stand. The British sailors watch in silent disbelief, and in the midst of their shock, one truth becomes painfully clear. This night belongs to Decima MAS. 05 and 12 hours. The first true rays of dawn spill over Alexandria's skyline, washing the harbor in a dim golden glow, a quiet, indifferent light revealing the devastation that the night had tried to hide. Smoke drifts lazily above the water, rising from smoldering fuel slicks. The once proud silhouettes of HMS Valiant and HMS Queen Elizabeth now appear motionless and strangely low in the water, their massive hulls resting like sunken colossi on the shallow harbor floor. Boats weave between them, some carrying officers, some divers, some exhausted sailors slumped over their benches after a night of hell. The British fleet looks wounded, stunned, searching for incidents below deck. The air inside the Valiant is thick with humidity and the sharp sting of oil. Emergency lanterns flicker. Pumps groan endlessly, battling the slow but relentless seep of seawater. De la Penne and Bianchi sit on the cold floor of their holding cabin, their soaked suits replaced with rough blankets. Their bodies ache from hours submerged in icy water, but they sit upright, alert, listening to the ship's strained heartbeat through the metal around them. Each vibration, each distant shout, each sloshing echo of rising water. Every sound tells them the truth: their work is done. What they do not yet know is how thoroughly they have altered the course of the war in this corner of the world. Outside their compartment, a pair of British Marines stand guard. One of them glances at the Italians every so often, still angry, still bewildered. But that anger is beginning to shift, evolving into something colder, more conflicted. Respect is creeping in. Unwelcome, but 40 hours. Admiral Morgan stands on the forward deck, coat buttoned tight against the morning chill. His officers cluster around him, exchanging grim reports. Queen Elizabeth's keel is fully embedded in the mud. Sir, the forward magazines on the Valiant were minutes from flooding before we sealed them. Refit will take months, at best. Morgan listens silently, jaw set. Behind him, 2 signalmen stand at their posts, sending frantic, coded messages to Cairo, to Malta, to London. The Admiralty must be told. Reinforcements must be requested. Strength must be displayed, even if they no longer possess it. A destroyer passes slowly behind the Valiant, its crew staring at the crippled battleship with wide, stunned eyes. They whisper among themselves. How did anyone get inside the harbor? What kind of men would ride bombs under a battleship? They must be mad. No. Another murmurs, staring at the hull of the Queen Elizabeth. Not mad. Goddard, a small motor launch pulls alongside the Valiant and Admiral Morgan descends the gangway, boots clanging against metal rungs. He gestures for a junior officer to follow. They cross the harbor toward the Queen Elizabeth, the boat's engine sputtering unevenly as it slices through oily water. From this angle, the damage is unmistakable. Her deck sits almost level with the pier. Lines of workers slog through waterlogged compartments. The great ship, once feared, respected, unshakable, is now a gutted leviathan whose belly has been ripped open by unseen hands in the night. Morgan tightens his grip on the railing as the launch circles her stern. Italian frogmen had slipped beneath this steel titan, planted a charge, vanished into black water, and delivered a wound no fleet action had managed. And what strikes Morgan hardest is the sheer audacity of it. 3 teams, 6 men, 1 night, and the Royal Navy's strongest anchor in the Mediterranean undone. Back aboard the Valiant. Penne hears a muffled tapping, a rhythmic metallic echo coming from somewhere beneath the floor. A diver sending signals. He knows the sound intimately. He closes his eyes. Some of his comrades might be dead. Some might have been captured. Some may still be lying at the bottom of the harbor, their Maiale machines entombed with them. Decima MAS missions rarely ended cleanly, but success always had a cost. Bianchi leans against the bulkhead, breathing shallowly but smiling faintly. "We did it," he whispers, voice raspy.
Pen's words once
Say a simple word, heavy ga and a ga touted outer hours. The harbor is fully awake now, alive with the grim efficiency of naval men, coming to terms with the unthinkable. Teams of British engineers swarm over damaged diagrams. Commanders stride back and forth across the piers, giving clipped orders. Divers continue their surveys, emerging with blackened faces and reports more devastating each time. Everywhere, eyes drift toward the cell where the frogmen wait. The enemy, the infiltrators, the men who brought the mightiest fleet in the region to its knees. Some British sailors glare with bitterness. Others look with curiosity. A few, just a few, look with admiration they refuse to voice aloud, because every man wearing a uniform understands the cost of courage, even when it belongs to the enemy. I'm in a dim corridor. A British warrant officer stops and stares at the Italians through the grated door. "You realize," he says quietly, almost grudgingly, "you've changed the entire war down here." Penne looks up, expression unreadable. "We only did what we believed necessary." The officer swallows hard. Then he nods once and walks away. Outside, the sun climbs higher, illuminating the full scale of the disaster. 2 battleships crippled. A tanker destroyed. A destroyer damaged. Harbor morale shattered. And all accomplished with equipment the British had mocked as toys. This is the morning when the Royal Navy realizes the truth, that the Mediterranean will never again feel safe. That the war beneath the waves has only just begun, and that 6 men from Decima MAS have written their names into naval history with salt, steel, and silence. 10 and 15 hours. By mid-morning, Alexandria Harbor looks less like a military port and more like a battlefield suspended in time. The smoke trails drift across the water in long, ghostly ribbons. Tugs move slowly between crippled ships. The clang of metal on metal echoes from every pier as damage control crews labor to stabilize what remains of the Mediterranean fleet. But no amount of work hides the truth. The might of the Royal Navy has been broken not by dreadnought guns, nor by aerial bombardment, but by 6 men slipping silently under the moonlit water. Whispers ripple through the harbor. 2 battleships lost in 1 night. Saboteurs right under our noses. No alarms, no warnings, nothing. Some sailors speak with anger. others with shock, but most with a reluctant below deck on the Valiant. The submarine, like confinement, grows hotter, more oppressive. De la Penne and Bianchi remain locked in their small compartment, their blankets soaked with condensation as steam rises from the machinery around them. The ship groans frequently. Long, metallic creaks like the sound of a massive beast pinned against the seabed. Water sloshes in the lower compartments with each minor shift. Pumps still throb endlessly, pushing back the flooding that would have swallowed the battleship hours ago without their frantic work. Every now and then, a British sailor walks past, glancing in at the prisoners. Some glare. Some ignore them. One or two nod quietly. War is complicated. Oh, 1100 hours. A senior British intelligence officer arrives aboard the Valiant. His trench coat is soaked from sea spray, and his face is drawn from a night with no sleep. He marches directly to the holding area, demanding access to the Italian prisoners. The Marine guards step aside. The officer stands in the doorway, regarding de la Penne with the cool, clinical stare of a man searching for answers he might never get. "How did you get in?" he asks. De la Penne's response is calm, almost gentle. "You protect your ships well, but not perfectly." The officer frowns. "You mean the nets?" "We cut through them." "The patrols?" "We passed beneath their keels." "The searchlights?" "We stayed in their shadows." The officer looks at him, unsettled. "And the mines, the underwater defenses?" A faint smile touches de la Penne's lips. "There are always gaps," he says. "Your men just don't know where to look." The officer realizes something then, something that hits like a blow to the chest. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. This was mastery. A level of underwater sabotage the British had never imagined possible. A new battlefield Nugan were prepared for. 12 hours across the harbor, Admiral Morgan returns to the Valiant from the Queen Elizabeth after hours of grim inspections. His uniform is smeared with grease and soot. He looks exhausted. Older, as though the night has added years to his face. He steps onto the Valiant's deck and surveys the scene. Men hauling hoses, divers emerging, engineers shouting, smoke drifting. The harbor is a hive of frantic activity, attempting to hide the helplessness at its core. He turns to an aide. "Send a message to the Admiralty," he says quietly. "Tell them the truth. Don't soften it. They need to know what happened here." The aide hesitates. "All of it, sir." Morgan looks toward the cell block, toward the two men who early were nearly dead beneath his ship. He says, "All of it. 1400 hours. De la Penne and Bianchi are brought up to the quarterdeck under guard. Both blink against the bright sunlight after so many hours in the dim bowels of the ship. Their legs are unsteady, their muscles stiff from cold and confinement. A small group of officers stands waiting. Admiral Morgan steps forward. "You are prisoners of war," he says. "But you acted with warning and with a certain conduct. Because of that, you will not be mistreated. It is as close to respect as a man can offer his enemy." De la Penne nods once. "Thank you." Morgan studies him carefully. "You nearly sank this ship. I did what I believed necessary for my country. And now?" Morgan asks. "Now," De la Penne replies, "I await whatever comes next." What comes next is something neither man could have predicted. 1600 hours. Far away in London, the Admiralty receives the full report of the night's events. Confusion and disbelief ripple through the rooms of Naval headquarters. How could such a devastating attack have gone unnoticed until the explosions themselves? How had primitive torpedoes, ridden like motorbikes, overcome one of the strongest naval fortifications in the world? Someone mutters, "If they can do this in Alexandria, Where else can they strike? A chilling question. Because the Mediterranean is now wide open to sabotage, and the Royal Navy knows the truth. The old rules of naval warfare are dead. As the sun dips low over Alexandria, painting the harbor with gold and crimson streaks, the two Italian frogmen sit quietly in their cell once more, calm, composed, and unaware that someday, when the war is finally over, they will be decorated by both Italy and Britain for what they accomplished on this night. But for now, the harbor still groans under the weight of their victory. Engines hum weakly in crippled hulls. Waves lap against scorched steel. Smoke drifts in the warm Egyptian air. And beneath it all lies a silent truth, whispered by the water itself. 6 men changed the course of the war. With courage, with precision, and with torpedoes the world had mocked as pigs. 0321 a.m. Alexandria Harbor. For a moment, the harbor feels unnaturally still, too still. Even the waves seem to hesitate, as if the sea itself senses something monstrous crouched beneath the British fleet. On the deck of HMS Queen Elizabeth, a lone lookout rubs his eyes. His breath smokes in the cold air. Nothing seems out of place except a faint, metallic vibration underfoot, a shudder so light he wonders if it's just his imagination. Then the world erupts. A single, deafening C-RAF-K fractures the night, followed by a shockwave that punches upward like a giant's fist. The deck pitches violently. Every man aboard grabs for railings, bulkheads, anything solid enough to keep them upright. A plume of water, black, oily, towering, erupts beside the battleship. It rises higher than the mainmast before collapsing back in a roiling avalanche that slams against the hull. Below, the compartment where the explosive charges had been planted is simply gone. The blast doesn't just tear steel. It peels it. 2:03 a.m. HMS 2 minutes later, a second explosion howls from beneath HMS Valiant. The Italian engineers, watching from their compartment below deck, hear only a muffled, thunderous roar, but they know instantly what it means. The lights flicker. Dust rains from the beams overhead. Men shout on the upper decks. Bulkheads groan as the battleship's underside collapses inward. Penne closes his eyes. He warned them. He kept his word. But he also knows what that explosion has done. 600 pounds of TNT placed directly beneath the keel isn't an attack. It's a death sentence. 2:03 a.m. Tici Harbor Hamayan Post. Admiral Henry Rawlings, commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet, bursts through the doorway, coat half buttoned, boots unlaced. What the hell was that? His aide, D. Camp, stammers as another tremor ripples through the harbor waters. Sir, both Valiant and Queen Elizabeth are reporting severe underwater damage. Rawlings stares at him. Impossible. No aircraft, no artillery, no shells, no warning. How? He demands. The aide has no answer. Out the windows of the command post, Rawlings can see one of his capital ships listing slightly, her bow dipping lower than it had minutes before. Floodlights flick across her hull. Or 6 men, Italians, divers, saboteurs, watch their work unfold from a small detention compartment on a British destroyer. No window, just sound. The explosions reach them as a pair of deep, chest, thudding concussions that make the metal walls tremble. One of the captured frogmen, Lieutenant Emilio Bianchi, looks over at Penne. It worked, he whispers. Penne does not smile. The charges were well placed, but inside, deep inside, he feels the weight of history shifting. 400 at a.m. Jack Cullen TM's British sailors rush below deck, wading through knee-deep water as they try to seal flooding compartments. Pipes burst like veins. Sparks shower from torn electrical conduits. It is chaos, pure, blinding chaos. On HMS Queen Elizabeth, The chief engineer shouts into a phone.
"We've lost the forward boiler room." "No, we can't counterflood fast enough."
"Sir, I'm telling you, the ship is settling. On HMS Valiant, the situation is no better. The battleship sags in the water, her once proud silhouette now dipped and wounded, the harbor lights reflecting off the widening pool of oil surrounding her. A petty officer wipes grime and seawater from his face and mutters, 'Whoever did this, they knew what they were bloody doing.' December 19, 1941, the sun rises over Alexandria Harbor like a spotlight revealing a crime scene, where two mighty British battleships once stood as symbols of Mediterranean power. Two crippled giants now rest on the shallow seabeat, held upright only because the harbor floor refuses to let them sink further. Tugboats circle helplessly. Officers bark orders none of their men ever expected to hear. A single truth spreads through the fleet like wildfire. The British Mediterranean battle fleet, once the most feared in the region, is no longer operational. And somewhere in a makeshift detention cell, Luigi Durand de la Penne finally allows himself a quiet breath of satisfaction. He has delivered the impossible, and he has changed the balance of power overnight. Alexandria Decima MAS 1941 Alexandria Harbor, the harbor that once echoed with the clang of British confidence now murmurs with disbelief. The Italian Maiale attack has struck deeper than steel. It has cut into pride, into the illusion that the Royal Navy was untouchable in its own anchorage. Smoke still hangs low over the water, mixing with the sour smell of ruptured fuel tanks. Small boats dart between the battleships like frantic insects, carrying officers, divers, engineers. Anyone who might understand how something this catastrophic could happen without a single alarm raised. A group of British sailors cluster near the quay, staring out at HMS Valiant. Her decks lie unnaturally close to the waterline, every gun turret frozen like a monument to a battle she didn't even fight. One sailor, his voice barely above a whisper, mutters, "Just one mine couldn't do that?" "No mine," another says.
"No bombs, nothing in the sky."
"So what then?" Silence follows. A heavy am. Baritis a ntro getiao Rome. Commander Morgan enters the interrogation room like a thundercloud. His uniform is wet at the cuffs from hours in the flooded compartments of Valiant. He looks furious, but underneath it, exhausted. Seated at the table are the Italian frogmen, cold, soaked, but composed. Luigi Durand de la Penne sits straight-backed, hands folded. A man who understands exactly what he has accomplished and what it cost. Morgan slams his fist on the table. "Tell me how you did it." De la Penne doesn't flinch. "I already told you," he says calmly. "I placed the charge beneath your hull and warned you enough to save your crew." Morgan's jaw tightens. "You sank 2 battleships," he says. "With 6 men." De la Penne meets his eyes. "No," he replies quietly. "I sank 2 battleships with courage, Commander. The men were just the instruments. The coded cables begin flying across the Mediterranean into Cairo, London, and beyond. The message is short, grim, and unbelievable. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Valiant damaged by enemy action. Both ships currently grounded in harbor. Operational capacity 0. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet, reads the dispatch twice. He sinks into his chair. 2 of His Majesty's finest, he whispers. Gone without a battle. But he quickly understands the larger disaster. The Royal Navy's Mediterranean presence has been shattered. No battleships means no ability to challenge Italian naval movements, no ability to escort convoys with dominance, no ability to project power. The Axis has just been handed a strategic window, one they will not waste. Hours later, word reaches Italy. At first, senior officers refuse to believe it. British battleships, iconic, feared, armored like fortresses, crippled by what the British once mockingly called Tinclad toys. Impossible. But the reports keep coming. And suddenly, Italy's Decima MAS, the elite frogmen once laughed at even within their own navy, are hailed as national heroes. In the corridors of the High Command, one admiral mutters, "The world will remember this." They must, and he's right. Because overnight, the balance of the Mediterranean has flipped. Convoys can now move. Axis supply lines, once strangled, can breathe again. The attack didn't just sink 2 ships. It rescued an entire theater of war. And Tarnas 2 work crews, divers, engineers swarm the waterline, fighting to keep the battleship stable. Pumps roar. Steel cables groan. Officers argue on the decks about how long repairs will take. Days, weeks, the whispered truth months. But even more humiliating than the damage is the admission that the British must hide this defeat. If Axis intelligence learns the truth, the entire region may fall. The Admiralty issues strict orders. No mention of the attack is to be made outside official channels. The battleships are to be reported as operational until further notice. A grim lie, but a necessary one. Aboard a British destroyer, a guard escorts de la Penne to the deck for a transfer to PW facilities. He pauses there, just long enough to glimpse the crippled giants he had attacked only hours before. They lie low in the water, silent, beaten. He feels no triumph now, only solemnity. He had lived to see the outcome. Many saboteurs never do. The guard beside him shifts uneasily. "Why'd you warn us?" he asks. "You could have killed hundreds." De la Penne considers this for a long moment. Then, a victory without honor is not a victory, and a soldier fights other soldiers, not the helpless. The guard doesn't respond, but he doesn't look at Duaba Contente more, only Riska has sifted before sunrise. The British believed themselves the unshakable masters of the sea. By noon, 2 Italian commandos, riding slow, fragile, leaking torpedoes, proved them wrong. The Mediterranean has changed, naval warfare has changed, and the age of underwater sabotage has begun. Aftermath BR 1941 Alexandria Naval El Rapia Arba Assign. The full scale of the disaster becomes painfully clear as divers return from their first detailed inspections beneath both battleships. Their reports read like autopsies. Hull plating deformed inward. Keel fractured along a 40-foot stretch. Forward magazines compromised. Multiple compartments permanently flooded. Damage so extensive, so deliberate, that even the most optimistic engineers shake their heads. HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Valiant are not just damaged. They are finished, for months, maybe longer. One diver, peeling off his helmet, mutters, "No ship survives that." Admiral Cunningham stands over a map of the Mediterranean. Red markers show Axis positions across North Africa and supply lines stretching from Italy to Tobruk and Benghazi. Blue markers show the British fleet, except 2 markers have been quietly moved to the side, replaced by a single note. Out of action. Indefinite. His chief of staff approaches cautiously. "Sir, shall we inform the Prime Minister?" Cunningham's shoulders sag, as if the weight of the Mediterranean itself sits on them. Yes, he must know, but not a word to the public. He taps a finger on Alexandria. "Churchill will understand. If the Germans learn our battleships are gone, Rommel will be unstoppable." Outside, the faint sound of welders' sparks echoes across the water as crews attempt to stabilize the crippled hulls. Cunningham closes his eyes. One night, 6 men, 2 torpedoes that weren't even meant to explode on impact. And suddenly, the Royal Navy is fighting blind. In Italy, the news spreads through the Regia Marina like wildfire. Officers burst into rooms without knocking. Telegrams slam onto desks. Men who once rolled their eyes at Decima MAS now whisper their names with awe. Luigi Durand de la Penne, Emilio Bianchi,
Fioravanzo, Marseglia, Shergat, Marino.
Names that will soon be carved into stone. But for now, they celebrate quietly behind closed doors. Italy has no idea how long the British will hide the truth, no idea whether the damage was catastrophic or merely inconvenient. Yet the sense of awakening, of vindication, is unmistakable. For the first time since the war began, Italy feels like a naval power again. A general lifts a glass of grappa. To the men with courage enough to face battleships with nothing but lungs and determination. They drink. No bombers, no artillery, no fleet action, just 6 men and 2-man torpedoes. Naval a tense meeting unfolds among British intelligence officers. One leans forward, voice low. We must assume the Italians will try again. Another shakes his head. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Tonight it did. A third snaps. And if they can get through once, they can get through again. The room falls silent. For years, the Royal Navy believed its anchors were fortresses. Now, every harbor feels like a trap. Every shadow under the water feels like an enemy. The world has shifted from battles fought above the waves to wars waged in the silent black beneath them. Penne sits alone now, the orange glow of the setting sun slipping through the porthole and painting the steel walls gold. In the distance, he can see the silhouettes of Valiant and Queen Elizabeth resting low in the water, immovable, broken, but still proud in their suffering. A guard, young, barely 20, pauses by the doorway. Will they float again? The guard asks quietly. De la Penne considers the question with the honesty of a man who respects the sea and all who serve upon it. With enough time, he says, a ship can be repaired. Then his gaze hardens. But not a fleet. The guard nods slowly, absorbing the meaning. This wasn't a tactical victory. It was a strategic earthquake. Darkness. Midnight returns to Alexandria, the same hour at which the Italian raiders entered the harbor the night before. But now, instead of calm confidence, the air is thick with tension. Searchlights sweep the water ceaselessly. Patrol boats form constant circles. Devers lurk beneath every major vessel. For the first time, the British fear the water. The Italians have taken something more precious than 2 battleships. They have taken certainty and replaced it with doubt. The island of our BTSM-2 crippled, but shy chance rest on the harbor floor. 2,000 sailors are displaced. The British fleet has been reduced to shadows, and the Axis will soon seize the moment. This is not the end of the story. It is only the breaking point, the moment the old world of naval warfare shatters and a new, unseen battlefield emerges beneath the waves. December 20, 1941, GHT Alexandria Harbor. The harbor looks like a graveyard. Almost no movement, almost no confidence. Just 2 paralyzed battleships sitting on the shallow seabed, hulking reminders of how 6 men rewrote the Mediterranean War in a single night. British dockworkers and sailors move quietly, speaking in hushed tones, not out of respect, but fear. Fear of how much the world might change if this disaster becomes public. Teams continue to pump water from the ships' bellies, but they're fighting a losing battle. New leaks burst as fast as old ones are sealed. Bulkheads groan. Keel plates remain split open like rib cages. One officer, exhausted and grimy, leans over the railing and whispers to no one. It should have taken a fleet to do this, not 2 frogmen on torpedoes. A coded conversation unfolds behind locked doors. Sire, what do we tell the press? Nothing. And the Americans? Tell them as little as possible. A silence. Then, Winston will not want the world knowing we've lost our Mediterranean backbone. Everyone in the room understands the stakes. If Rommel learns the truth, the Africa Corps will push with renewed fury. If the Italian fleet realizes just how crippled the British are, they may attempt a breakout. Secrecy is the only shield left. The British decide on an extraordinary measure. Both battleships will be listed as fully operational in all official reports. Photographs will be suppressed. Movement logs altered. Dispatches rewritten. A lie to protect an empire. Rama Decima MAS is 24 Satiachiatasika back in Italy. The men who carried out the mission are ghosts. Celebrated, whispered about, but officially unnamed. Their return will not come for many months. They are prisoners, heroes without applause. Yet inside the Decima MAS headquarters, officers quietly toast their achievement. Not with fanfare, but with respect, the kind reserved for warriors who walk into impossible situations and walk out alive. A junior officer stands before the chalkboard where the raid's objectives had been written weeks earlier. 3 lines. 1. Breach harbor defenses. 2. Disable or sink major British capital ships. 3. Escape if possible. He draws a line through each one. The chalk dust drifts like smoke. Alexandria 21, 1941. Aboard the damaged battleships, engineers and divers work nonstop. Their tools clank and whine day and night. Floodlights illuminate torn steel like a battlefield morgue. One diver surfaces, ripping off his mask. There's no patching this, he coughs. You'd have to rebuild half the ship. His supervisor nods grimly. What about towing? To where? She'd break apart in open water. The truth spreads through the teams. The British battleships are out of the war for at least a year. In naval terms, that might as well be forever. I see Dentio Psi Pevming. Luigi Durand de la Penne sits in his cell when the door opens. A British officer steps inside. Admiral Cunningham himself. He doesn't yell. He doesn't posture. He simply studies the Italian diver for a long moment before speaking. You accomplished the impossible, Cunningham says quietly. De la Penne stands. He does not salute. That courtesy belongs to one's own flag. But he holds his posture like a soldier addressing another soldier. It was my duty, he replies. Cunningham nods once. When this war ends, he says, men like you should wear medals. In any navy. There is no anger between them. Only understanding. Because tonight, they are not enemies. Just sailors who have seen firsthand how courage can change the world. When peace finally comes, De la Penne will indeed be decorated. Not by Italy alone, but by the British. Admiral Charles Morgan. The very man whose ship he sank, will personally present him with the gold medal of military valor, praising the Italians' courage, discipline, and humanity in warning the crew before the explosion. A moment unthinkable in 1941, but earned, not with bombs or torpedoes or hatred, but with honor. Go Alexandria December 19, 1941 was not just a raid, not just sabotage. It was the moment the modern era of naval warfare began. The moment small teams proved they could reshape global strategy. The moment underwater commandos ceased being curiosities and became weapons feared across the world. From that night onward, no harbor would ever feel safe again. No battleship would ever assume invulnerability. No navy would underestimate the power of a handful of determined men. And the Mediterranean, once ruled by great steel giants, learned that the deadliest threats were silent, patient, and swimming beneath the surface.